So these are the lecture videos for day 3. We're actually splitting today's videos up into 2 separate pieces because we're doing 2 very different things. The first one is that we're going to be talking about RStudio. We're going to be going through a first example of how to use RStudio. And then the second video is actual course content. We're going to be talking about quantitative variables and distributions and talking about what these distributions can look like. Okay, so this video we're talking about the RStudio part, and I just wanted to walk through a simple example of using RStudio. In this case, what we're going to be doing is taking the class survey data set, and we're going to be making a histogram of coffee usage. A frustrating thing about R is that it has a very steep learning curve, at least right in the beginning. It's one of those things that once you get used to it, the context or the syntax makes a lot more sense and it becomes much, much easier to use. But in the beginning, it can just look like a foreign language. So I tried to set it up so that each group has someone who has at least a little bit of computer programming experience. But if you're having difficulty with this, please, please, please just reach out on Slack. We've got our R questions channel. That's a great place to put any I got this error, what do I do type questions. And I also just wanted to point out that this is difficult for just about everybody when they first start. And it's also difficult, we can get weird errors for people who have been doing this for a while. And if you're banging your head against the wall because you keep trying something and just isn't working, just take a step back, do something else for a little bit, maybe ask somebody for help, and then come back to it. Okay, so the goal of this video is to work out how to get a histogram from a particular data set. So we have our stat11 survey.csv file. So this is going to be available on Moodle. It should be posted in the Slack. And if you're using RStudio server, you can access this through the server links. So you can click the ... and type in /home/stat11f20. I'll include the text for that you can copy and paste. And that should give you access to this same file. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import our data set into RStudio. So up here, we're going to click Import Dataset from Text. And we're going to find wherever our data set is saved. So this is where, if you're on the server, you would navigate to home/stat11fall20. If you have downloaded this onto your computer, you're going to find wherever you put the file, this CSV file. So I saved it in the stat11 folder, and here we have the .csv file that we want to open. I click Open, and it's going to prompt us to confirm a few settings. So a CSV file is a comma-separated variable file, and this input file in the upper right is what the file actually looks like. So what R is going to do is that it's going to turn this CSV into basically a spreadsheet. So it wants to know, what are the separators? Well, they're commas. It wants to know, are there headers? So the first line is the name of each of the columns. So yes, there are headers. I have this set up so that the default options should just work. So if you hit import, then in the upper left, we can see our stat11 survey file. So this is a spreadsheet, and it has all the information that we might want. If we look over here, we have this coffee column. This is the column that we want to make a histogram with. So that's our goal. Okay. If you have experience with computer programming and you know what a console and a terminal are, you can do a lot of this through the console or a terminal. But if you don't know what that means, and even if you do, I highly recommend making an R Markdown file. So we're going to go to File, New File, R Markdown. And we're going to call this whatever we want to call it. Let's call it the coffee file. So one of the points of R Markdown is that it can export a nicely formatted output file that can be either an HTML, a PDF, or apparently also a Word document. When it comes to submitting homework, the software that we use really likes PDFs, but for now we're going to stick with an HTML. So in the upper left, we have our R Markdown file. This is where we're going to be doing most of our work. This is where we're going to be typing things in and running code chunks. That said, there is one more piece that we want to pull up from the console. So when we first imported our data set, the console ran this line of code. It said stat11 survey is read the file at this location. So what we want our Markdown file to do is to also read that file. So we're going to copy this line and include it in our setup code chunk. Now it'd also be a good time to mention or to talk about the different formattings for R Markdown. One really important thing that it does is that it lets us write plain text and code in the same file. So hopefully you can see it on the YouTube video, but so lines 8 through 11 have a background that's darker, so it's a gray rather than the whites of the rest of it. This is R Markdown saying, hey, I recognize these lines as computer code rather than as plain text. So what it's going to do is when it gets to things that don't have that, like this is an R Markdown document, Markdown is a blah, 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 it's going to output those just as text. But when it comes to the pieces that aren't like that, so here we have a code chunk that's running the code summary cars, it's going to do the R computer thing of running this command. Okay, so this default file, it's something that you certainly can run and see what happens yourself, but I'm going to be getting rid of all of this. So everything from, for me now, line 13 down, but the R Markdown part down. And I'm going to be writing my own. So I'm going to say that, all right, this is the coffee, or I'm making a header, so coffee header. And now I'm going to say, all right, I want some text explaining what I'm doing. So this is a graph of coffee usage. And then I want to actually make this graph. So I'm going to make this a code chunk. So this is going to be this is the coffee code chunk. And I'm going to close it like that. All right, so now I could also have more text down here. But I want this portion to make a graph. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, well, I've already imported stat11 survey, or I've already imported the spreadsheet, the CSV file, as stat11 survey. I want to pick out a particular column of it. So I'm going to make a variable called coffee. And I'm going to say that this is going to be the column of stat11 survey. So notice that once you start writing it, it often autofills. So stat11 survey is the spreadsheet name, and I'm going to be picking out. So if I hit $, this is going to give me all of the column options. I want coffee, so let's take that option. So now if I just say coffee, what the program says is, oh yeah, it's that column. So now I can run histogram. So the R command for that is hist, and then open parentheses, coffee. And this should make a histogram for that coffee. Okay, so we're going to run this, and we're going to see what happens. So I'm going to hit knit. So what knit does is it takes your entire R Markdown file, and then from scratch, it's going to run each of the codes in order. So I'm going to hit knit, and then, oh, it's the first time doing this, so it's going to ask me to name this file. This is the coffee demo file. And then it should create an HTML file for this output. So what we have here is this coffee header got printed as coffee header here. The text, this is a graph of coffee consumption. And then we have our code chunk. And so notice that this is isolated. It's in its own grayed out format. So these are code lines that were run, and then the output was this histogram. Okay, this was the goal of the video, but maybe we want to edit things a little bit more. Rather than the title being histogram of coffee, maybe we want to change what that says. So we're going to go back to our program over here, and we're going to minimize the console. Where we ran the histogram line, we're going to add in a few options. So rather than just saying histogram of coffee, we're going to say histogram of coffee, and I'm also going to say I want the title to be stat 11 coffee. So I'm going to write main equals, and then in quotes, stat 11 coffee. Okay. So as far as R is concerned, histogram is a function that has a few options. One of the options is main. If you set main to something, it's going to change the title to whatever that is. So now if I were to run this, I'm going to hit knit again. We've got our new HTML file with our new graph that now says stat 11 coffee. Okay, if we also want to edit some other things, maybe we want the x-axis to say, instead of coffee, it should say cups per week. Then we can also add in another line, another argument that says the term for this is the XLAB, so the X label. Maybe we want that to be cups per week. Okay, now you can imagine if we keep writing more and more arguments into this function, that it's going to get very messy looking. So a convention is whenever you have something like this, we're going to enter this over multiple lines. So we're going to add in a couple enters. And so now this is a little bit easier to read. But we can still run this, and it should give us what we wanted. So we have our cups per week as our X label. One last edit that we might want to make, and so there are many, many other options we can choose from, but one last thing I wanted to point out is that we can also change the bin size. We can change how many columns there are. So this defaulted to there being six ranges in our histogram. Maybe we want that to be 12 instead. So I can change breaks to be equal to 12. So we don't need quotes on this because it's not talking about a string, it's not talking about text. Instead, it's just a number. So breaks equals 12, hopefully should give us our new graph. Okay, one last feature and then we're done with this video is we don't have to click knit every time. So one advantage of R Markdown is that in a code chunk, it has the controls for running just that code chunk. So maybe if instead of 12 breaks, I wanted 20 breaks, I can, instead of hitting knit and it running the entire thing from the beginning, we can just rerun this part. So if I hit play here, it's going to run these lines and give us just this new graph.